Hi students, I'm Abhishek from Vidyaru, and in today's session we will talk about the principles of development. So as you can see, these principles of development are going to be there in each and every teaching examination, be it CTET, be it KVS, be it DSSB. So whichever teaching exam you want to write, you will find questions on principles of development for sure. So as you can see, this session is on child development and pedagogy. So basically this session is going to be in complete English medium, because we realize that our complete English medium students, that means the students from South India, the students from Telangana, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, so those students are unable to understand Hindi. In fact, a lot of students even from Northeast don't feel very comfortable listening to Hindi. So we have made an active effort to record all our videos in complete English medium. So let's get started with this session. But I would like to remind you, if you like the session, please press the like button for sure, share the video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done that till now. And while subscribing, make sure that you press the bell icon as well, so that you get the notifications of all the videos that we post. So let's see what are the kind of questions that have been asked on principles of development in previous examinations. Let's read this question together. There are individual variations. Students, the first question, there are individual variations in the rate of motor development. Yet the sequence of motor development is from dash to dash. It is talking about the sequence of motor development. So students, what comes first? When it comes to motor development, gross motor skills. Gross motor skills develop first, and after that we develop fine motor skills. Please remember what happens when you are talking about motor development, students. When we talk about motor development, so it is the gross motor skills that are developed first, and from gross motor skills we move on to fine motor skills. If you don't have understanding about what gross motor skills are and what fine motor skills are, let me explain with an example. When we talk about gross motor skills, students, when we talk about gross motor skills, we are talking about big muscle groups, we are talking about large muscle groups. We are talking about big muscle groups, the large muscle groups, such as the muscle groups involved in, the muscle groups involved in swinging a bat. Let's say you are swinging a bat, you are swinging your arm, you are swinging your racket. So big muscle groups are involved. You can call it gross motor skills. Catching a ball, throwing a ball, catching a ball, throwing a ball. What are these? These are the gross motor skills that we learn over a period of time. Then what happens? After we have developed these gross motor skills, motor development moves towards fine motor skills. It moves towards fine motor skills, such as the skills involved in, students, such as the skills involved in manipulating objects. That means the skills which are involved in manipulating objects through your hand, writing, drawing, knitting, stitching, all those skills, students, all those skills which involve hand movements, finger movements, hand movements and finger movements. So imagine all those things that we do with our hands. Imagine all those things, knitting, stitching, dyeing, all those things that we do with our hands. So that is the application of fine motor skills. Sure. The movements of fingers, the movements of hands. Sure. So what is the answer? The answer to this question will be that the sequence will be from gross motor development to fine motor development. First we will develop gross motor development, and after that we will develop fine motor skills. Sure. Now let's move on to the next question. And next question is going to be a little tricky. Let's read it together. A teacher found that a student is facing difficulty in drawing a square. This student faces a difficulty in drawing a square. She assumes that this student would also find difficulty in drawing a diamond. Now let's see what this scenario is. Square. This student faces a difficulty in forming a square, in making a square. That means square is what, students? Square is a two-dimensional figure. Square is a two-dimensional figure. Whereas something like diamond, it is a tetrahedron. Diamond has a tetrahedral structure. So a tetrahedron is what? It is a three-dimensional figure. Students, it is a three-dimensional figure. That is the point to be understood. What happens? She realizes that the student is unable to handle two-dimensional figures. He is unable to draw two-dimensional figures. So she assumes that she automatically understands that the student will find difficulty in drawing a diamond also, because diamond is a three-dimensional figure. Why did she assume that? What application? The application of which principle? The application of which principle of development are we talking about? She applies which of the following principles to arrive at her assumption, to arrive at a conclusion? So what is it that she assumed? From something like two-dimensional figures, we move towards three-dimensional figures. Students, two-dimensional figures are relatively simple. Two-dimensional figures are relatively simple and three-dimensional figures are relatively complex. Please understand that. Imagine the movie industry, the film industry. So the last 25 years have seen three-dimensional films becoming popular. But what came first? Two-dimensional films came first. After that, we moved on to something like three-dimensional films, 3D films. So why is that? Because students, something like handling two dimensions is relatively simple and handling three dimensions is relatively complex. So there is a certain definite sequence. There is an orderly sequence in which we move. And what is that orderly sequence? We move from something simple to something complex. First we learn the simple things, then we move on to the complex things. So that is the order, that is the sequence, that is the order which our development also follows. So there is a definite orderly sequence that first you will learn to draw a square, which is a two-dimensional figure, and when you develop control over that, when you develop a fine understanding of that, then you will learn to handle three-dimensional figures also. So there is a definite orderly sequence, there is a definite chain which you go through. So those steps are in order. So what is it? It is the application of principle of orderly sequence. Development tends to follow an orderly sequence, and in this case, students, in this case I have also given you what the sequence is, from simple to complex. And students, please understand, these are the questions from past exam papers. But if you want to complete the entire topic, if you want to study with us, then the numbers are given on your screen. You can dial them and you can be a part of our live batches where we discuss each and every concept right from the start, right from the basics. Don't forget that. Sure? So let's move on to question number 3. But before we do that, there is an interesting word, saltatory. Saltatory, some students would not know the meaning. So saltatory means something which is discontinuous, something which is not continuous, something which is discontinuous, something which moves in leaps and bounds, something which moves in leaps and bounds, takes jumps, leaps and bounds. So it is something which is discontinuous. But we understand, we know that what is the principle? The principle of development is that it is a continuous process, principle of continuity. So development is saltatory. It is anyway a wrong choice, because saltatory means discontinuous, and we already know for sure that development is a continuous process. It is a never-ending process. It is a never-ending process, and it is a continuous process which keeps going on throughout our lives. Sure? So in this question, it was the orderly sequence. Let's look at the next question now. Development from central part of the body, from central parts of the body to the peripheries. This question has been asked multiple times. Students, you should get this right for sure. From the central part to the peripheries. Look at, let me draw a stick man. Students, let me draw a stick man. Pardon my drawing, but there is the central part, there is the mid-axis. Yes or no, students? There is the mid-axis, the central part. So what happens? Please listen to me very carefully. What does this principle tell you? This principle tells you that the central part, that means the organs which are near the midline, the central part, the organs near the midline of our body, they will develop first. The organs which are near the midline of our body, they will develop first. Think about those organs. Which are those organs? Look at the heart. It is very close to, students, it is very close to the midline of the body. The stomach, again very close to the midline of the body. The internal organs such as liver, stomach, heart. So these organs which are closer to the central part, the midline of the body, they will develop first. And then what happens? Then development moves from the central axis, the midline, to the extremities. What do we mean by the peripheries? Students, look at it. What is that part of my body which is most distant from the midline? That part is my fingers. So fingers are at the greatest distance from the midline of the body. So these are the peripheries that we are talking about. That means our feet, our hands. So the fingers are the most distant part of our body. So what is the direction? From the midline to these distant extremities. From the midline to these distant extremities. In this direction, development will be shaping. Development will be moving. Sure? So what is it? You can call it from near to far. Very simple. From near to far. What is near to the midline? What is near to the midline? That particular organ will develop first. What is far away from the midline? That will develop later. That is why, students, even a 3-year-old child who has developed all the internal organs, his lungs are functioning very well, his heart is functioning very well, his stomach digests the entire food very well. So internal organs were developed way earlier. But that 3-year-old kid still finds it difficult to hold the pencil, still finds it difficult to control the pencil. Why? Because the control over fingers has not yet developed. And why? Because it will take time. Think of development as moving from the midline to the extremities, and it will take some time before that 3-year-old kid develops complete control of the most distant extremities of the far away parts of his body. So what is this principle known as? Students, this principle is known as Proximo Distal Principle. In very simple terms, proximal is something which is near to us, distal is something which is far away from us. So something which is near the midline develops first, something which is far away from the midline develops later. So near to far, proximal distal principle, Proximo Distal Principle, that is the direction of development. Sure? Let's move to the next question. Let's read it once. Human development is based on certain principles. All of us know that. We have discussed so many principles till now. There has been the principle of what? The principle of orderly sequence, that development goes through a certain order, it follows a certain sequence. Apart from that, we talked about the principle of continuity. We even talked about the proximal distal principle. So we understand development is based on certain principles. Human development follows certain principles. The question says, which of the following is not a principle of development? Continuity, yes, this principle of development is a continuous process, it is a never-ending process. So yes, this principle is there. The question says not a principle. So which of the following is not a principle? The answer is reversible. Students, development is not reversible. Think of it. Had development been reversible, imagine what will happen. Let's say today I develop the control over my fingers, I develop the control over my hand movements. What if it were to revert? What if it could go in the previous direction? Then I will lose control. Students, then I will lose control of the hand motions, then I will lose control of the hand control. Yes or no? So development is not reversible. Development is not reversible. That stage of development which you have crossed, Listen to me carefully. That stage of development which you have crossed, you cannot go back to the previous stage. Look at the stages of development. We go from infancy. What are the stages of development? From infancy, we move on to childhood. From infancy, we move on to childhood. From childhood, we move on to teenage, which is also known as adolescence. You can call teenage as adolescence also. From teenage, we move on to adulthood. From teenage, we move on to adulthood. And from adulthood, we move on to old age. Can this sequence be reversed? Students, can this sequence be reversed? Can you move from old age to infancy? Can this sequence ever be reversed? No, this sequence just cannot be reversed. So which is not the principle of development? Reversibility. There is no reversibility as such. Continuity is there. Yes, sequential order or sequentiality is there, and general to specific. Simple. What happens? General responses come first. Students, general responses come first, and after that specific responses. After that specific responses come into picture. Now listen to me very carefully. What happens? The young infants. The infants have a general sucking reflex. I'm giving you an example. Infants have a general sucking reflex. They suck everything that is near them. They suck everything that comes within their reach. So there is a general sucking reflex which is there in all infants. That's a general reflex. That's a general response. So the general response develops first. Now what happens? Because of that, there are so many times that infants ends up sucking something which he should not, ends up putting something in his mouth which he should not. So then what happens? Does that keep happening over and over again? As we grow up, what happens? This general sucking reflex is replaced, and then it becomes more and more specific. Then we only consume those things, then we only put those things in our mouth which we find to be tasty, which we consider are edible, which we consider are worth eatable. Sure. So that general sucking reflex, that general sucking response gets faded, and specific reflexes come into picture. So what is the direction? General responses will come first, and after that we will see specific responses. Let's look at the next question now. Cephalocordal. Students, now we talk about the cephalocordal principle. If I were to just break up these words, you will realize. Anyway, this question has been asked multiple times. So let's look at it. Cephalocordal principle of development explains that development proceeds from. So cephalocordal principle also talks about some direction. Now what happens? Students, cephalo means something which is related to the brain. Cephalo means something which is related to your head. Sure. Cephalo, the word cephalo talks about something which is related to the top of the body. Sure. That means your brain, that means your head. And caudal, basically cauda is something related to tail. But what happens? Of course, as human beings we don't have any tail. So basically cauda means tail, but what it translates into is that from head to toe, because tail is something which is downward. It is something which is downward in the lower part of the body. So you can very simply say that the cephalocordal principle means that development proceeds from head to toe. Students, that is why what happens? The first thing that the infant develops is neck control. Again I'm drawing a stick man. Then what happens? Physical development, the neck control, it appears first around 3 months. Around 3 months of age, the infant learns how to control his neck, learns how to stabilize his neck. That comes first. Can that 3-month-old infant, can that infant stand on his feet? No, the infant cannot stand on his feet. Now what happens? After neck control, he learns to sit upright. Around 6 months of age, students, around 6 months of age, he is able to stabilize his back. His back and his torso are now strong enough. He can, control his back. So what is the direction? In 6 months, even this kid is able to sit upright, his back is already stabilized. Still, can that infant stand upright? No, it will take him around a year. It will take him around a year because his toes, his feet are still not strong enough, are still not developed enough. So what is the sequence, students? Look at the sequence from neck downward. From neck downward, that means from top to bottom. Cephalocordal principle is the most simple principle around. From head to toe, it means from top to bottom. Top to bottom, that is the flow of motor development. So the answer is head to toe. Cephalocordal principle, head to toe, that means from top to bottom. So now this discussion of practice question comes to a close. But students, in December you have your examination. CTET examination is scheduled to be held in December. So make sure you have started your preparation already. And I would repeat it once again that the numbers for our support team are given on the screen. So call them up and join our live batches. If you cannot join our live online sessions, then you can always enroll for our online video courses. So online video courses are also there on our portal. So make sure you inquire for them. And before we wrap up, please make sure that you share the video with your friends and like it positively. Thank you so much.